2:02. Probably safe to get started with just introductions, and we'll go from there, and people will continue to filter in. So I guess I'll start. My name's Adam Day. I'm Associate Treasurer here at Rutgers, and Treasury has responsibility for some of the operational aspects of PCI DSS compliance. We'll talk a little bit about what that is, for those of you who might not know. I'll let Denise introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon. Denise Romano. I'm the Associate Vice President for IT for the Health Sciences and OIT, and also the Division of Policy, Risk, and Compliance for Security. So we'll be working with the team on PCI compliance and the regulations that surround that, and how we view those.
Thank you. MK.
Hi, everybody. I'm MK Shu from the UFA PMO. I'm supporting Adam and the team with the PCI compliance initiative. I'll also be helping to manage the Q&A section of the presentation today. You'll notice on your Zoom functions that you do have a Q&A button, which will allow you to type in questions as we go along. And once we get to the Q&A portion, we'll be able to respond to each of your questions as we go along.
Okay. And Brent?
Everyone, I'm Brent Hobby. I'm a security advisor with Campus Guard. We're an information security consulting company that's working with the university to work through PCI compliance questions and get the institution to where we can assert full PCI compliance.
And last but not least, because I'm just going down the pictures here, Ivy, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ivy Rasmussen, also with Campus Guard. I'm a customer relationship manager and part of the support team working with Rutgers.
Great, thank you, everyone. So as MK mentioned, please use Q&A to put any questions you have. We might not get to them during the conversation, but we'll definitely reserve enough time to answer them at the end. I did want to say, because I had a couple people ask, that if you attended Monday's town hall webinar, this is the same content. You're welcome to stay, but there won't be much different from Monday. So I won't be offended if you excuse yourself. All right, so let me just get my presentation here. So I want to start a little bit with a bit of history on PCI compliance at Rutgers. So PCI compliance, as I'll refer to it, and Brent will explain much better than I can, is basically the security and security of credit card transactions and the processes and the technology around that. So back in 2004, in December, I believe, this PCI DSS standards were published. Again, Brent will talk a bit more about what that is, but it was new then. Rutgers University sort of developed internal processes and strategy around compliance somewhat organically, right? We built processes internally and we used those for many years. Back in 2018, Audit and Advisory Services did a review of our PCI compliance processes and identified a number of gaps and areas for improvement. It became somewhat obvious that a lot of those gaps were a result of a lack of internal expertise. These standards are somewhat complicated. There's a lot to them. Some of us are not very technical, and interpreting these things is a challenge. So coming out of that review, we did an RFP for what's called a qualified security assessor, of which Campus Guard is, or a QSA, to come in, do an assessment of our environment, as well as to provide ongoing support, basically outsourcing that expertise and finding it in them. So Campus Guard was chosen. They came in a little over a year ago to the New Brunswick campus, looked at some of the higher volume, higher risk merchants, and did a bit of a deeper dive than Audit and Advisory Services. And now from both of those, we've created sort of a project plan to address some of those shortcomings. So I realized I'm on the wrong slide here. I didn't talk about the agenda, but this is my history slide. So I will allow Brent to introduce Campus Guard a little bit and talk about them.
Thanks, Adam. Adam mentioned, that we are a QSA, a qualified security assessor firm, also approved scanning vendor. But we're a full service information security consulting company, and I won't go into the sales spiel, but just we have about 300 or so schools that we work with across the country and in Australia. So anyway, this is a by way of introduction. So Adam, if you go on. So for those of you who are really new to the process, PCI DSS, or PCI, is payment card industry, and the DSS is the data security standard. So PCI DSS is the payment card industry data security standard, and it's a common set of controls that we built around to protect, as Adam said earlier, protect credit card data, personal information, and transactions. In that history, that 2004, I mean, prior to that, and actually they still have, each company, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, each has an information security program. But it became pretty obvious as credit cards became more and more widespread that asking merchants to keep up with what does Visa want me to do, what does MasterCard want me to do, and so forth, wasn't really going to work. So they formed, and the card brands own PCI. They formed PCI to put together a unified set of standards to manage credit card security, so that as a merchant, you only have to follow one set of rules. And there's, if you look kind of in the bottom right, there's multiple parts of PCI. So there's rules that govern the card readers, the physical hardware. There's rules that govern the software, and there's rules that govern the data. And together, that's all the PCI different standards. One interesting thing is every merchant, the way PCI is structured, each merchant is responsible for meeting those rules. So they are contractually liable to complying with DSS, which is where this process that we're going through now, that's basically the driver for that process. Okay. So what they came up with was a framework. So those of you that have worked in different areas, there's frameworks for governance. Back in 2004, they published this, and interestingly enough, we're 15 plus years into it. The same 6 goals and 12 requirements, that framework hasn't changed. So we're still operating under that same framework, but I'm not going to read it to you, but I put it here so that you can kind of understand what PCI DSS is trying to achieve. So it's everything from building a safe network to having good policies. And so what's it all trying to protect? Well, it's trying to protect the information essentially that's on the credit card. So the card number, expiration dates, the stuff that's encoded on the magnetic stripe or the chip. And effectively, that's what the whole program is designed to protect, just the end-to-end transaction safety of that information. So who needs to apply? I think we actually already had one question come across of I don't do this or whatever. Basically, there's 2 groups. There's a merchant, and these are basically folks that accept credit cards, or they own a merchant ID, a MID. You'll hear that a lot. That's basically just the number that the merchant bank assigns you to identify you, or a service provider, and that's somebody who provides services to a merchant to handle some aspect of credit card processing. So they could be a website hosting company, they could be a payment processor, but basically they're providing a service that has to do with the storage, processing, transmission, or can affect the security of those credit card transactions that we talked about. So those are the 2 entities that have to comply with the PCI DSS. And by comply, we talk about it sometimes, and it turns out that one of the interesting problems is identifying who or what at the university falls into the scope, who has to comply. So the short answer is it's people, processes, and technologies, and again, that have to do with storage, processing, transmission, or can affect the security of cardholder data. And it's that third one. I mean, I think the storage, processing, transmission, that's pretty clear. That last one could affect the security of is where we tend to get groups like information technology and other people involved, because while they may not be directly in the stream of processing transactions, they operate systems that could affect the transaction, and so they fall into the scope as well. And then any system that helps form that cardholder data environment or connects to it. An example of connecting to it would be, for example, if you have to log on and you're using the university's single sign-on to log on, then we have to then be concerned about how those accounts are being managed, how strong are those passwords, and so forth like that. So we can bring in things that you wouldn't normally think of as directly related to credit card transactions can in fact be in PCI scope, because those credit card transactions rely on those other systems and platforms. So PCI itself organizes into a couple different ways, but one of the things is called merchant type, and this is important for you all as merchants, because it depends, the SAQ, if you see in the upper left-hand corner, that stands for self-assessment questionnaire. That's the questionnaire that you have to fill out as we assess your compliance. So the type of infrastructure you use, the ways you accept credit cards and all that, we look at that and we decide which of these SAQ types, what type of merchant are you? The count in this column represents the number of questions on the questionnaire. And then I ordered them based on number of questions, because roughly the fewer the questions are, the less risky PCI deems you. So an A at the top of the list is a fully outsourced merchant, meaning it's a website, it's hosted somewhere else. You don't ever see or touch credit card information. That's the least risky kind, at least for the merchant. And then we go all the way down to the bottom, which is D. And these are, a D is a catch-all. It's basically, if you don't qualify for one of the others, you're a D. Bs, for example, are standalone card readers. So think about, if it's just on the desk, plug into a phone line, that's a B. A C, think of it as a cash register with some software running on it. Think about like at dining or somewhere where we have an integrated cash register. So the more complicated it gets, the riskier it is and the more questions there are. And then we talked briefly earlier, we mentioned that, why are you obligated to be compliant? And the answer is because you're contractually obligated to do so. Unlike a regulation like FERPA or HIPAA, PCI is not a law. It's not a regulation. It's an industry agreement, and it's all held together with contracts. So the acquiring bank, the merchant bank, where you process your credit cards, if they want to issue cards or process, they go to Visa, Discover, and they sign contracts with the credit card brands that they will be compliant. You as a merchant, when you go get a merchant ID from your acquiring bank, you sign a contract where you agree to be compliant. If you have a service provider in that contract, you obligate them to be compliant. And actually there's a picture that's not on here, which is the user. Like for example, myself, I have a credit card. In the terms of service, I'm agreeing to use it the way I've agreed to when they issued it to me. So it's all held together with contracts. There's no federal police that come in to manage compliance with PCI.
Sorry, I mean, thank you, Brent. As you can see, that's why we brought Campus Guard in, because it is complex. There are a lot of different decision points that need to be made to determine what your SAQ type is, what your level of risk is, and how to address that. So I did want to talk a little bit about now what I call the new process for PCI compliance at Rutgers, and kind of the project plan that we're undergoing now. We have these sort of dual objectives. One is to reach an end state where we have the correct governance and policy and ongoing process, sort of a longer term goal. The other is just to continue to attest our compliance as a university and do the little things sort of immediately that we need to do. So in terms of that policy, we do have a card acceptance policy. It's well overdue for revision, and we're reviewing that now, and we'll be updating that. Governance will be establishing a PCI compliance committee internally to manage this going forward. Those things haven't been done yet, but will be done soon. But in the meantime, we've been working very hard to identify all of you, people who are involved in credit card processing to some extent or another. We did not have good data when we started this, or good records of who is involved in the process. That's certainly been a challenge for us, and I'm sure there are more people who we've caught in that net who may not be involved anymore, and people who we didn't catch who are involved. So certainly please reach out to us if you're not the right person, or if you know of other people who need to be involved. I didn't mention at the beginning that these slides will be made available. We have some contact information, things like that. So don't worry too much about writing that down. We'll make the slides available on a recording of this session. So bear with us as we figure out who the right people are and get the program up and running. So just to talk a bit about what are your responsibilities as a merchant. So there are really at least three things. The annual self-attestation questionnaire that Brent mentioned need to be completed. The form, again, depends on how you're collecting credit cards and what the level of risk is. It's typically a business manager and or local IT support, depending on, again, if you're using a network connected device or software or something like that, who complete the form. We'll talk a little bit about Campus Guard's online portal. In the past, these forms were done on paper and collected together via inter-office or scanned and emailed. In the future, we're going to be using Campus Guard's portal to do it online and automatically aggregate that as a university. So that should make it a lot easier going forward. I did want to mention in the past, I believe with Scholarship, so we have this university-wide payment gateway provider, formerly Scholarship, currently SchoolPay, and we're working to move to Nelnet as a longer-term solution, where you might just have like a PayPal, like a link on a website that routes to a shopping cart for you to check out and pay by credit card. In the past, each merchant would fill out an SAQA, or that was the process. I'm not sure how many did. For now, we're going to do one SAQA as a university for SchoolPay and then for Nelnet, at least for now. That might change in the future, but that's our approach. So if you only collect credit cards via a SchoolPay or Nelnet link, you don't necessarily have to fill out an SAQ. You do, however, still need to do training. So that's another aspect of being a merchant, is annual refresher training on PCI compliance and what your responsibilities are. The third thing for each merchant is documentation. So each merchant has to have data flow diagrams, which are sort of a high-level network diagram that shows the process of where credit card information is moving, local security procedures. If you have a physical terminal, how are you locking it away and keeping that secure? And an incident response plan, where if something does happen, if there is a breach or credit card information is somehow stolen, who do you contact? That last one, IT is going to put together sort of the higher level process, right? So who do we actually notify for a breach? But you should also have local departmental procedures, contact a manager, something like that. These things, all of these things, determining the SAQ type, figuring out what documentation should look like, these are all things that I'll say we, but really Campus Guard can help provide guidance on, and we'll be setting up users in the portal based on our best understanding currently. It may not be the correct SAQ type, it may not be the correct person, but as we work through this, if there are any questions about what SAQ type is appropriate, that's another area that Campus Guard can walk through, your unique circumstance and process and help figure out what your requirements are. So at this point, I think I'll hand it over to Ivy to talk a little bit about Campus Guard Central, which is their online portal.
Hi. So pretty soon you're going to be release your sign-in information for Campus Guard Central, and that does utilize Rutgers single sign-on, so it won't be a new username or anything like that for you. It makes it nice and easy. It is a fully integrated system in terms of you get to upload your documents that Adam was speaking to right into this portal. You complete your SAQ questions. There's also help features. There are kind of like recently asked questions or further explanations that are also built into it. So it's really user-friendly and intuitive. Also, we will be providing additional training for Campus Guard Central when that comes. And just like both Brent and Adam talked about, the SAQ type, which can be kind of the most challenging, or the question right now where you're like, I'm not sure what that is. That is something that we help with and we support with. So more to come on this in the future, but I think it will be a great program and a great portal system for everyone to kind of keep everything in one place also.
Great, thank you, Ivy. So along those same lines, next steps. So as Ivy mentioned, you'll be receiving an email with notification basically to log into the portal. Again, it won't necessarily be everyone who's on this webinar will get a login. We've chosen at least one person from each merchant ID. Some departments may have multiple merchant IDs, maybe the same person, but they'll receive an email to log on and get access, and that's where you'll complete the SAQ. We're targeting basically a June 30th deadline for the annual SAQs and the annual training requirements. We thought it would make sense to align that with the fiscal year. If you've already completed training that was sent out in December, January timeframe, then that's good through this coming June 30th, and then we'll start the cycle over again. Some people might have done SAQs on paper or in some other form already in the past 6 months. If so, you don't necessarily have to worry about putting it in the portal for this cycle, but we do want to start fresh, basically July 1, with a new cycle where everyone is using the portal. And if you have not completed an SAQ, then we would ask you to do it in the portal, and that's really easier than doing it on paper anyway. We do have a slide here about training, and I believe Shakira is on the webinar at some point. If we have any direct questions, I saw she responded to Q&A. But Shakira is managing the training platform KnowBe4, and she had set up the training links that went out in December, January. There's a URL here if you have not received a training invitation, or if there's someone on your team that requires training, you can go and request access. There's also an email address there, the infosecurity@oit.rutgers.edu, if you have any questions about training. In addition, I should have put this earlier, but we have this generic PCI-compliance@finance.rutgers.edu email address. That's really for any general questions. I'd say even training, it's fine. You can use this email address and we'll route it to the right person. We'll coordinate with Brent and Ivy at Campus Guard for more specific questions. So this is sort of probably your best first contact place if you have questions or need other information. I think that's all I had prepared. So I don't know at this time if we have any questions. I haven't looked the Q&A. Don't be shy.
It looks like we've only got one question so far. So if you have any questions in the Q&A, please feel free to type them in to the Q&A box, and then we'll answer them in the order received. The first question that we received, I'm no longer responsible for credit card machines. How do I remove myself from this process?
So we'll try and make sure we do that. I see Shakira responded about training, so she can remove you from there. And I'll try and remove you from our sort of master list of contacts. If you left a department or something like that and you know who took your place, I would ask maybe to send us an email just so that we make sure we have someone for that department or that merchant, unless you've completely eliminated, you know, if you're still in that department and you just don't accept credit cards anymore, that's fine. But if that department still accepts credit card payments, we would just like to know who the right person is. Again, this is a huge challenge for us as people move and leave and things change. It's hard to track. So we would appreciate if you send us a note.
Okay, we have a quick request to show the link for training again.
So yes, again, I will share these slides. I'll try and send an email even this afternoon to the same email address for these webinar invites, and you'll have it there. So this is the training URL. Again, it's probably easier if I send the slides out. And then the other email address was pci-compliance@finance.rutgers.edu.
All right, next question. Will Campus Guard Central be able to group us by our teams or applications? And will we still be able to be scanned quarterly?
So I'll take a first crack, Ivy. So what we attempted to do is, so every merchant ID is required to do an SAQ. Where we knew that certain merchant IDs were within a department, we did create a departmental level grouping and assigned a basically departmental manager that would have access to all those SAQs. So we were able to group them in those terms. However, it kind of depends on your setup, whether you can do one SAQ for multiple merchant IDs or if you have to do separate SAQs technically. And I'll let Brent and Ivy explain that a bit better.
No, I think that was a good explanation. So there can be multiple users assigned to a single MID. So, you know, if there's 3 or 4 people in your department who all use the same machine, let's say, you would all be assigned to that. And then as Adam was saying, there's a department level. So let's just say housing. So there would be like a housing department manager, and then they could oversee those. When you do log into Campus Guard Central, you will only see what you're assigned to. So you won't be, you know, seeing all the Rutgers MIDs or anything like that. Department heads or department admins will see anyone that's assigned within their department. So there is a breakout. And again, I think when we go through the additional training on Campus Guard Central, and it'll be more small group and specific to the type of SAQ you're completing, I think a lot of the unknown about Campus Guard Central will be answered during that time also.
Thank you, Ivy. And I see there's a second part of that question about the quarterly scanning, which I didn't talk about in this webinar because it's more on the IT side. But there are some instances where if there's a website that's hosting a payment link, they're required to have vulnerability scanning to make sure that the virus prevention is up to date and things like that. So we've continued to perform the quarterly scanning that we always have in the past. So that will continue. We do have an item on our project plan to make sure that scope is appropriate, make sure we're scanning all the URL addresses that we should be scanning. So it'll take us some time to sort through that. But yes, there will still be quarterly scanning. I think we can still do ad hoc scanning if needed, but we're really focused on scanning only for PCI compliance.
Okay. Will the university be allowing payments by Venmo or PayPal?
So obviously this comes up a lot. Unfortunately, there's really no good way to create a corporate account. So Venmo is purely a person-to-person payment application. Although I should correct myself that I think there is some merchant functionality now with Venmo, but we've had a hard time figuring out a good way to set that up. So I won't say definitely no. And Brent, I saw a smile on your face when that question was first asked. So if you have any insights into sort of the security profile, things like that, but we've struggled to find
it's a really interesting, it's a really interesting question. Universities really struggle with it because PayPal has a fairly unique terms of service. Venmo is of course owned by PayPal. And so it can be done. It's more of an institutional decision about how to do it or if they want to do it. It's interestingly enough not a PCI issue,
right.
Because it's the credit card transaction and a PayPal transaction happens between the end user and PayPal, not between, in this case, Rutgers and anybody. So it's an interesting decision that a university has to go through from a contractual and other issues.
So we continue to sort of keep up with our peers and see what they're doing. We've looked at it a few times. It continues to come up for obvious reasons. It's what students want to use. It's what anyone wants to use in a lot of situations. So I'll only promise to continue to evaluate it and see if we can find a prudent way to do it.
How often should PCI certification be renewed?
So it's an annual requirement. So each year, the training is required and the self-attestation of compliance is required. So basically it's a rolling 12-month cycle.
We take credit card payment information and enter the information into a payment screen on a software platform. Will we still be able to continue this process?
I'll let Brent.
Well, I'm, in terms of you can, I mean, we'll work with, Adam's group and you, if you'll send an email to that address, we can work through your specific configuration. The answer is you can do that. It falls into, it's called a virtual terminal. There's a specific PCI configuration for that. It's one of the more risky, in other words, if you remember that chart, it's one of the ones with more questions. So we kind of have to sit down and work through what you're doing and how you're doing it. There are usually also other options which we might be able to explore as well. So if you'll shoot an email, we'll be happy to get with you and work through that. And but the answer is I don't think we're here to tell you not to do something. We're here to figure out how to do it correctly.
Yeah, thank you, Brent. And just to reiterate, there are a lot of different ways that credit cards are being accepted across the university. So, where there's something that you're not sure of, that's why Campus Card is here. We just have to walk through what you're doing, what you're looking to accomplish, what systems you have, and we'll figure out the best approach.
There's a question here that I'll take on if you guys don't mind. You mentioned there's a new system we'll be moving to after school pay. Is this for everyone? Have we been given any info about this new system? So I'll take this one on because I'm also managing the project to migrate to the new vendor. So school pay is an interim solution for payment services. As you know, scholarship, the contract was ended in rather abruptly. So we had to kind of scramble and put the project team together and develop an interim solution through school pay. And they've been working out nicely in that regard. But there are some additional enterprise projects that we're working on at the university and some other integrations that we're hoping to take advantage of. So we'll be moving to Nelnet Business Services. Again, this won't be a kind of a big bang, very quick rushed transition. This will be a gradual transition. And if I could plug the open forum next week that I'm going to set up, we'll be providing additional details about that migration and where we are with the project next week. If you have any questions, you can email paymentproject@finance.rutgers.edu. That's also in the Q&A text chat. You'll be able to see that, or email me directly, and then I can address those additional questions. But yeah, we'll be having that on the 2nd, March 2nd, via Zoom, and we'll be able to answer some additional questions about that. And then another question came in, and I'll let Shakira vocalize her response. I saw that she also typed out a response in the chat. Will Campus Guard Central send out an email reminder to all of the university staff to ensure they complete the online PCI training modules prior to the June 30th deadline?
Hi. So as far as the PCI security awareness training, that comes out of the Know Before training platform. And there are reminder notifications that go out to registered trainees. However, end users have found that those messages may end up in their junk folders. So any manager who reaches out to me via the email address that you see on your screen, infosecurity@oit.rutgers.edu, if you request a report for your particular group, I can provide that to you so that you can have a status as to who's completed and who's still pending completion for their training. So we're going to rely a lot on managers to remind their staff to complete. And one of the primary reasons for having this town hall is also to remind everyone about the deadline. So as Adam stated before, just to, kind of coordinate the deadlines for the SAQ and the training, they're both, due on the 30th. So everyone is aware of that date. But certainly reach out to me and I can get you a report, but there will be notifications that go out automatically from the system. But I don't want that to be just the primary way that individuals are reminded about the deadline for training.
And then I might ask a similar question, but about the SAQs. I'm not sure, Ivy, if Campus Guard Central sends any sort of reminder in automated fashion, or if that's something we can configure, or if we should do that outside of the system.
So currently, that is not a feature. It does show on the dashboard when your due date is. So when they log in, you'll be able to see that. And department admins and main administrator admins will be able to see the progress that each of the individual merchants has made. But unfortunately, the automation side or the reminder side is currently still being built out. So I would think your next round for 2022, that'll definitely be a feature. But for the current one due in June, I don't imagine it will be complete by then.
Right. Yeah, and my team has admin access, so we'll be able to see who hasn't completed and send friendly reminders as we get closer to June 30th.
Another question. We are in a continuing education unit using the Anchor registration system administered by the Division of Continuing Studies, or DOCS. DOCS handles PCI compliance certification for all Anchor branch users, correct?
So I'm not sure I understand the question. So is Anchor only being used by continuing studies? So again, I can't recall if that is our merchant ID or if it's Anchor's merchant ID. So it would kind of depend on the setup. So if it's like a Rutgers, like maybe an Elevon merchant ID, then for each merchant ID, continuing studies would need to do the attestation for each one of those. If Anchor is a service provider and using their own merchant ID, then we would just need them to send us their PCI attestation, which is another process that we're developing, is how to track all of our service providers and ensure that they're PCI compliant on an ongoing basis.
I think, Adam, if we sort of generically answer the question, because it's an interesting question in the sense that if we have a departmental merchant ID, then somebody in the department owns the merchant ID and is responsible for how it's used in the department. So So you think of it as you're responsible for everything downstream of you. So yes, somebody is responsible in this case for how that uses. To Adam's point, it may actually be a vendor that's responsible for it, or it may be Rutgers. So again, if you'll shoot us an email, we'll be happy to talk to you and figure out what's going on in your specific case.
And if I would just add to that, Adam and Brent, that Anchor, there's an integration there between Anchor, Zenigrade, and currently School Pay. So this may fall into scope of that that roll up SAQA for all of those departments.
Okay.
Okay.
So again, we'll just have to look at it, but that would make sense.
Another question, I'm currently researching auction vendors for special events. Many of the vendors do not have merchant provider, but are themselves PCI compliant. Is this type of vendor even worth considering?
So again, I'm not sure I fully understand, and it could be something that we just need to sit down and talk about. So there are several scenarios with vendors. Sometimes they provide the payment processing, but use our merchant ID and our acquiring bank to actually settle the transaction. Sometimes they do the processing and they have their own acquiring bank to settle the transaction. So it kind of depends on who the merchant of record is and how that works. What I'd say is, the typical process for evaluating a vendor processing payments is to first go through procurement. They'll put it through an IT security review. If you don't want to go through the procurement process because you're not sure, we can always do that IT security review and see PCI compliance. And then it will come to my team just to evaluate, who's a merchant, if banking needs to be set up, if a new merchant ID needs to be set up, things like that. So it's hard to answer that question the way that I read it, but certainly feel free to reach out and we can talk about that situation.
Okay, and then we do have a clarification that Anchor does use School Pay and they're planning to move to Nelnet when available.
Great.
Okay.
That's something I'd probably ask Brent to help me take a closer look at, is some of those integrations, and whether that's different than just a link pointing to a. So.
Well, it can be, but I would hazard a guess. I mean, just purely guessing, it's probably just a redirection, but we'll need to look at it and verify.
Yep.
All right. And it looks like that takes us through all the open questions. Are there any other questions? Oh, can you show the email address again?
Yeah. So again, feel free to reach out to this address, and we'll figure it out. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of unique situations at Rutgers. There are a lot of requirements. So meshing these two things together can be a bit complex, but I think we'll get through this initial setup process, and then hopefully it'll be a lot easier going forward. And just as things change, we'll figure it out. So
one more coming. Oh, two more. Oh, a couple more coming in. What are the PCI compliance levels and how are they determined?
So I'll look to Brent, but my understanding is we're either compliant or not.
Sorry. So the PCI, there's no level. It's a pass fail. I guess there's a degree of risk assessment that goes into it, but at the end of the day, when we send the forms to the bank, we're either asserting that we are in compliance or not in compliance. So there's not really a middle ground there. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's how it goes to the bank.
Right. And if you're asking about the SAQs that have that's our own level of risk, then those are dependent on how you're collecting credit card information.
Right.
Was there one more?
It looks like there was one. Shakira, I think you.
Okay.
Yeah.
was about
Okay.
training. This is the same.
Yeah, so the SAQ type is determined by how you're taking credit cards. So if you're like when we were talking about school pay or Nelnet, if you're just redirecting like a pay now button on your website, that's a type A usually. If you've got a cash register with software and an attached card reader and you're doing things, yeah, that's a C. So we'll work with you to figure that out. That's one of the challenges is getting that inventory merchants correct. And that's actually a fairly large part of this overall project is just getting the correct list of merchants and their designation.
Right. And I did see the question about training. So if you did the training in December, January, that's the training that's good through this fiscal year. And then we'll start fresh again, July 1 for training needs to be completed during that 12-month period.
And then will the webinar be posted on your site to review at a later date?
Yes, we'll probably post this session. I'm not sure about Mondays with the internet going out, but we'll definitely post this one. We'll post the slides. I will also email links to these and to the slides as well to the attendees. We're also updating our website. It needs quite a bit of work. So, but yes, we'll make it shared.
Okay, and another one just came in. I work at the foundation and we process donations via various methods. If we'd like to meet to discuss our specific situation, should we email the PCI compliance email to schedule?
Yes, please do. And we can set up with Campus Garden.
Are Stripe and Cvent already approved as compliant?
Don't know off the top of my head. I do know that OIT has a list of vendors that have been previously approved. I can't recall those two specifically, but in the very least, I don't, we can do that security review and see. One of our goals is also to try and reduce the number of vendors that are alike. If there's a really good scheduling system that meets everyone's needs, then we'll try and have a preferred vendor or default vendor, because that then reduces the compliance obligation to continually check and make sure that that vendor is compliant. It's easier to do with 1 or 2 than 20. So part of our project plan is to look at our vendor list and confirm compliance and hopefully narrow it down a little bit.
All right. Any other questions from anyone? Seems we've slowed down to a trickle.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for your attendance and your engagement here. This is really just a kickoff information. There'll be more to come, and we'll try and make this as painless as possible. I have gotten great feedback on the training. It's not very long. It's, I think, 20 minutes or so for each module. Not too painful. So appreciate your participation and more to come. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks all.
Thank you.